I have just a few housekeeping items to take care of before we begin. All attendees will be muted throughout the duration of the webinar. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. You can ask a question at any time by using the questions box on your screen, and at the end, we will read the questions out loud to address them with the group. If you don't see the box, you may need to expand the settings by clicking the little red arrow at the top right of your screen. Please also try to specify if your question is for RBFF, Ipsos, or both. If you are having technical issues, direct message us and Joanne will try to troubleshoot with you. A copy of the slides along with a recording of today's presentation will be posted to the website at takemefishing.org/churn following the webinar. We're adding that link into the chat for everyone right now. An email will be sent to all attendees when these materials are available. Before exiting the webinar, please take the time to fill out the survey that will pop up at the end. The survey helps us plan future webinars, determine future research projects, and better assist you in your marketing efforts. We really appreciate your feedback on today's webinar. Today we have Stephanie Don and Sarah Middle from global market research firm Ipsos to lead you through the research and tell you everything you need to know. But first, I would like to introduce our President and CEO, Dave Chanda, to offer a few thoughts and insights regarding the Psychology of Churn research project.
Thank you, Rachel. I'd like to take a moment first to thank our research partners who helped make this multi-phase, year-long project possible. The American Sport Fishing Association, Grady White Boats, the Marine Retailers Association of America, the National Marine Manufacturers Association, and Yamaha Watercraft. We really appreciate their financial support, as it's only through partnerships such as this that RBFF is so successful at what we do. Our team is thrilled to share the results of this remarkable research project. RBFF has built a strong track record with our national campaign focused on recruiting and reactivating anglers, and we've become highly skilled at it. However, when it comes to retention, we have largely relied on our industry and state partners who have direct access to their customer databases. Although we have supported these efforts with retention toolkits, the issue of churn remains a significant challenge. Despite fishing participation levels in the U.S. hovering near record highs, excessive churn rates often reduce substantial gains to only modest increases. That is why it is essential for us to strengthen our collaboration with state and industry partners to tackle this challenge head on. And with the full backing from the RBFF Board of Directors, we are developing a comprehensive strategy aimed at addressing churn in fishing and boating participation. And to lead this effort, I'm excited to introduce our newest team member, JD Strong, RBFF Senior Director of Industry Engagement. JD.
Thank you, Dave. Welcome, everybody. I would say it's great to see everybody again, but I can't really see you on this screen. But that's a great introduction from Dave. Why did RBFF and all of those great sponsors invest so heavily in this year-long process to research the psychology of churn? Well, it's simple. Of all the 3 R's that we have out there in R3, retention is really the low-hanging fruit. And the numbers bear this out. We've been doing a great job on recruitment on the angling side of things, in particular, 57.7 million anglers last year. That's 19% of the US population. As Dave said, we're hovering around record numbers when it comes to that. 15.5 million new, but we lost anglers as well. That slide on the graph on the right shows you the trend, the downward spiraling that we're seeing in terms of numbers of people falling out of fishing. And it really is a leaky bucket problem. Think about how the gains would be in participation if we could curb that churn level. So it's important that we address this growing concern when it comes to participation. And also, it's about dollars and cents, money for conservation and money to support the boating and fishing industries. the average angler spends $1,500 per year. And if we were to retain just half of what we lost in 2023, that would equal $9.2 billion in revenue to the industry. And you can think about the impact that has on sport fish restoration and conservation work across the country. Same is true in the boating industry. Participation is down. An estimated 85 million Americans went boating in 2023. That's down from about 100 million in 2020. Boat sales are down from a 13-year high of 320,000 new units sold in 2020. Now we're down to 180,000 units sold in 2023. So these are obviously alarming numbers to the industry, but for retention purposes, it's important to note that nearly half of first-time boat buyers bail out in the first 5 years. And those that buy that were prior boat owners tend to stick with it longer, average of 19% across those prior boat owners. So again, this churn issue is huge, a big problem for both the fishing and the boating industry. It's my next slide there. So at the end of the day, it's also sensible business. And I will stress that it's not just for the private sector, but for the government sector as well. It's sensible business. Loyal customers simply lead to growth. This is really, again, the low-hanging fruit. Research tells us that existing customers are 50% more likely to try new products and spend 31% more on average compared to new customers. Selling to an existing customer is up to 14 times higher than the probability of selling to a new customer, and increasing customer retention rates by 5% increases profits by 25 to 95%. Acquisition costs have increased by almost 50% in the past 5 years acquiring those new customers. And acquiring a new customer is anywhere from 5 to 25 times more expensive than retaining an existing one. So this is data that's common across the business sector, and it just makes sense at the end of the day, right? That keeping a customer you have is the best investment over the more expensive and more resource-intensive effort that it takes to get new ones in the door. So before I turn it over to Stephanie and Sarah, I just want to point out real quickly here that there's a large amount of data in this year-long research project, more so than this 30-minute summary from our friends at Ipsos are going to be able to do justice. This is really just the tip of the iceberg, and so I would really encourage you after this webinar, go to the website. We'll have the address again, it's in the chat, and really dive into this new Churn resource hub that RBFF has created and dig through all the other great research and tactics and resources that'll be there. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie for a high-level overview of the research.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hope you're having a good day. So we'll start with just some background on all of the research, and JD sort of just walked everyone through why this research was important. Ultimately, the goal of it was to provide RBFF and all of you insights and recommendations, and to help you start to brainstorm different tactics to help drive participation. The way we did this was by taking a look at the psychological and behavioral science components that actually encourage or influence why people have stopped, and what made it easier for them to kind of trade boating and fishing for other activities. As JD mentioned, it was a year-long study. It was about 4 phases of research, which I'll take you through in a second. But the output, which we'll share with you at the end, and which you'll have a lot of other resources available on, are personas of those who are most likely to lapse in fishing and or boating. And all of them come with sort of specified different retention and activation strategies, but there are also some overarching strategies that will apply to the whole community that you can think about and start to leverage as well. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we did 4 phases of research, and I'll go through these sort of quickly. If you want any particular information about these, feel free to reach out. The first was done this time last summer, and it was all exploration of social conversations through things like Facebook and Reddit threads and things that are available on the internet. The second was an expansion of understanding what some of those themes were. What were people saying about participation through our pop-up community? And that was where we were able to really have a dialogue, a back and forth dialogue with some lapsed anglers and boaters to really understand and dig deeper on some of the things they were experiencing. Then we moved into the quant, which is what we'll really be focusing on in this presentation, which was really sizing out and quantifying the reasons for which people have left the activities, leveraging all of the information we had collected prior. And finally, there are some illumination videos that we have collected from consumers, really just kind of talking to and giving a picture and a voice to the different personas of lapsed participants. Next slide. Very briefly, online conversations, that first phase, we scanned them, we analyzed them, they were synthesized into themes. These are some of the outputs, but that directly implemented and informed the conversations that we were then going to have with consumers in phase 2, as well as what we quantified in phase 3. We looked at barriers, we looked at things that people were saying they liked or disliked, or challenges they had with either continuing or just, people love to kind of complain and air their challenges. And so that was really rich around what are they struggling with. Next slide. That second phase that I had mentioned was using our syndicated community platform. So Ipsos has a lot of different types of research. One is a community where you can engage in a two-way conversation with consumers in something that looks sort of like a Reddit thread, but it allows for really customized questions, some probing, some moderation. And this research really unlocked some of the core components that we measured. So what are some of the core barriers, but also what are some of the psychological components and non-conscious behaviors that people have that could be contributing to why they are more likely to lapse in a sport or in an activity, and why they may be more likely to actually pick something else up instead. So we did use that as a core input into the quantification phase, which I will talk to you about next. Okay, so why are consumers lapsing in boating and fishing? So let's take a look at the key reasons. Across all of lapsed anglers and boaters, there are 4 themes that really differentiate them from those who are active in the sport, those who you've retained, those who have been doing it for a little while or even a long while. The first is that people who have lapsed generally have a lower interest in being outdoors. And we'll go into each of these a little bit more deeply in the next couple of slides, but the first one, not as engaged, not as important for them to be outside. The second, they don't have as much of a shared social and communal identity. So this is a really important one that we'll dig into, but really making it feel like this is a community and a sport for everybody is important. The third is generally a lower commitment, and that's a variety of contributions, but they are not as passionate about the activities. And then the fourth, which Sarah will take you through in a little bit, is underlying mindset differences. So actually psychological and subconscious things that differentiate these consumers from those who are more likely to stick with boating and fishing. So let's dig into the first one. Next. So like I said, a lower affinity for outdoors. In terms of the amount of free time that they have, there are actually other activities that are competing for their free time more so than among those who have kept with the activities. So they're more likely to watch TV, they're more likely to be reading, more likely to be spending their time cooking. And then in terms of how they are actually spending their time outside, they're more likely to go to the park, either by themselves, with kids, but visiting parks was their most common form of being outside. Next slide. The other aspect that was really kind of illuminating to all of us was that the lapsed anglers and boaters really struggled to see the activities as for someone like them. We've done a lot of research with women, but even with other participants of who is the average angler, who is the average boater. Only 21% of those who have lapsed considered to have like a strong or a somewhat strong overlap in the identity that they perceive anglers and boaters to have. And this is compared to 50% or more of those who are currently active. So there is this disconnect of people considering themselves to be the same as, or the sport to be for someone like them. The other kind of component of identity is the ability to share it with other people. So there's this kind of personal identity, and then there's this social identity. Only 1 in 3 lapsed participants had someone else to go with. So there is a suggestion of those who are more likely to lapse. It's because it's not necessarily ingrained in their social group or in their family, and there is a desire to want to do these things with other people for a lot of newcomers. So that is something we also found to be important. All of these will really kind of contribute to some of the retention strategies we share with you in a couple of slides. You can go to the next. In terms of commitment, so this was the third theme we talked about. It was more challenging to really commit to the activities. So lapsed anglers and boaters really were only participating between 1 and 5 days, compared to those who are retained and active. They were participating 20 to 22 days out of the year. So that's 2 in 3 of the lapsed groups who really weren't in it for the long haul, so to speak. There were a lot of different reasons for barriers of why they may have done it. We know that, starting out is hard. There are some challenges with comfort and things like that, but the commitment level just really wasn't there. The next statistic is that about 77% of those who have lapsed were really kind of like fair weather participants. They were really only doing it in warmer weather. So more of your common times that you would think of fishing and boating, more summer, more spring activities, which also, allows for more ample time to lapse in the sport. And then the third statistic is that about 20% of lapsed boaters, only 20% owned their boat. This is compared to 50% of active boaters who own their boat. And so the boating part of this is very much hinging on accessibility. For those who are lapsed that did not own their boat, they were going with friends or they were renting boats. But we'll see some of the barriers to, actually boating have a lot to do with the accessibility of the boat itself, the equipment, etc. Next slide. The other component of commitment would be, how was their first impression? How did they enjoy it? Did they have a good time? And the key thing we learned here is that if you were lapsed, if you had, have left the activity, your first impression was not as great as those who retained. So you were more likely to be a little bored or find it hard or consider it to be a little stressful. For boating, there was a little bit more of an understanding or an experience of it being kind of expensive and maybe a little bit too much or too serious. So those are just some really tactical things that you can understand in terms of being sort of barriers to participation. Next slide.
And then one of the other ways that we can think of optimizing these first impressions is not only overcoming barriers or like removing negatives or hurdles, but also optimizing sort of the positives. And one way we can do that is through understanding people's underlying motivations. And what we did was we collected sort of their approach, their underlying motivations to using their free time. And what we found was that lapsed anglers and boaters differed on 3 key motivations. The first one here is productivity. They find it harder to sort of detach and let themselves relax. We saw that sort of across the board, people identify as being busy, not having a lot of free time. And therefore, these individuals in particular find it hard to justify not being productive with their time. So they want to feel like when they're going out angling or boating, that they can also be productive. And we'll talk a bit more about that. The next one is propensity for risk. So they are about 20% more likely to say that they prefer to stick with the things that they already know, the things that they feel comfortable with. They're more likely to sort of stay in their safe zone. And we know that picking up fishing or boating is sort of a heavy lift to get started, right? So definitely something to think about and how we reduce that and sort of build into the familiarity pieces that we can. Variety seeking. Very similarly, they are much more creatures of habit, that they have their routines, they are happy in their routines, and so disrupting their routines by introducing these activities as something really novel and new may be a harder ask than, again, appealing as being more familiar. On the next slide, we have some more tactical ways to think about how do we take these mindsets and then activate against them. What we know from behavioral science is that when we can align to someone's underlying motivations, they're more likely to pay attention to whatever the touch point or material is. They're more likely to find it valuable, so engage with it, and are more likely to actually do whatever the behavior is we're trying to nudge them towards. And so what are the ways that we can do that, knowing these three differences in mindsets? The first one is that productivity orientation. So instead of highlighting fishing and boating as a way to like get away, relax, let's instead talk about all the ways that these activities can actually help them be more productive and move towards some of the other goals that they have in life. And we were able to collect some of those goals in this research to see which ones bubble up to the surface, right? So how can we talk about these activities actually contributing to taking care of your mental and physical health, taking care of your family, getting that quality time with them, getting outside, those sorts of things. So how can we make it feel more productive? The other areas are more about how do we make these activities feel more familiar and less risky to come back to or to stick to or to take on. So one thing we can do is what we call piggybacking. Piggybacking in less fancy terms, it's just the idea of tacking on an activity to something you're already doing, right? These people are creatures of habit. So how do we take the activities and things that they're already doing in their life, like going to the park on a regular basis? Many of them talked about going to the beach. I know visiting your local lake also bubbled up as a common thing they're already doing, or hiking and biking. So let's attach sort of these newer activities to something they're already familiar with. So that's the idea of piggybacking. The other thing that we can do as we try and align it to the activities they're already partaking in is try and reduce the perceived risk or uncertainty with joining, right? So making it very clear when there are opportunities that you can show up to this state park event, for example, or come to the store and we have everything set up for you, that there is an expert available, that we have an easy start kit. Whatever the case is, there's going to be a lot of value in helping to reduce any uncertainty around how do I get started, what sort of support will I have. And then beyond sort of these alignment to non-conscious motivations, there are also some very concrete barriers we need to think about addressing, and Stephanie will cover that on the next slide.
Thank you. Yeah, so building on, some of the core reasons that people are saying that they lapse, we wanted to really identify specifically what are the things that are contributing to their lack of participation or they're stopping the participation. These are barriers that apply to all lapsed anglers and boaters. And what we're going to see after this is how there are additional barriers that are more unique and more specific to certain people. That's what really kind of clusters them together. But before we get there, the first kind of group of barriers that we're seeing have all to do with how are they spending their free time. Top one is other family obligations took over my time. So how can we piggyback into some of those obligations, if at all? Doing other things for their family, doing other things for themselves, other hobbies that are taking priority, having activities of kids or significant others, and then of course prioritizing things that are more of an indoor activity, which might be a little bit more challenging to address. But all of those other ones are different ways that we can think about how can we make boating and or fishing easier for you to integrate into the things that you're doing. We do see that there is that high need for productivity showing up in that a lot of people said that they felt like they needed to use their time more productively, meaning they didn't know, they may not be able to just relax, or it might seem like it's too much of an effort or maybe too far to go. So there are some issues around how do I feel like I'm actually using my time? What else can I gain from doing these participation? The other two have to do with the social identity aspect. And so not having the person you used to go with or not having anyone to go with are other kind of core barriers that everyone experienced of those who have lapsed. And then finally, what I mentioned earlier, which is all of the access to equipment. And this was primarily a barrier for boaters. It's the number 4 barrier for boaters. It's a little bit lower on the list for anglers. So moving ahead, we will take a look at how these barriers build onto other barriers and gave us different groups of consumers who you can kind of target a little bit more or think about in a little bit more of a specific manner. Sorry, you can go to the next slide. Thanks. So of everybody who has lapsed, we have identified 5 unique personas of lapsed anglers and boaters. They are very easily identifiable based on sort of what we were thinking of as their main pain point. The first is a group of people who need more adrenaline. They may need a little bit more excitement. You know, I know catching your fish or first fish or boating might be really exciting, but maybe getting to that point of catching the fish is what has turned them away. So how can we make it a little bit more exciting for them? This is about 20% of anglers and boaters. The next one is really focused on boaters, and it's needing more affordable access, needing more affordable strategies for how they can enjoy particularly boating, where it's not as expensive to own or maintain or participate. The third is needing geographical support. So this one is made up of both anglers and boaters, and these people really don't know where to go near them. They used to participate, they may have moved to a new place, and we'll talk about these 3 groups in more specificity in a few slides, as they are the most addressable. But you can really kind of understand what's the main point of contention that you have with the activities, and then go from there when looking to identify who these consumers are. The last 2 are a little bit less targetable. The fourth is needing an enthusiastic buddy. This is a group of people who are a little bit less likely to participate overall, but might be doing it more if they had someone who could really take them under their wing and bring them along and show them the ropes. And then the final group is really a group of people who just generally aren't as interested. There are a multitude of reasons they don't go. So this is a group that we're really not focusing on. It's sort of your lapsed group because they tried it and it might just not be for them. Go to the next slide. So like we said, one question can identify these consumers. You can have conversations with them and just say, hey, why aren't you going back out? What can we do to help you? And sort of listen for some of the things that they were saying. If you wanted and had the ability to send out any sort of survey, it's a quick 1-question survey that we and RBFF can help you with. But all it is ranking the barriers for why they stopped fishing. So we have things like feeling intimidated by the sport, equipment being expensive, things around their health or it not feeling rewarding. There's also some around wanting to do something more thrilling or worrying about causing animal harm. So depending on how they rank all of these can also help you identify really what is the crux of why they're lapsing. But regardless, Sarah's going to take you through in a few slides how can we take what we know about these consumers now and really build retention strategies and reactivation strategies to bring them back into the sport, whether it's a retailer or a marina. How can we encourage them to stay with us?
Then we can dive right into the next slide. So we'll start back from the top. So what are sort of the scaled ways that we can think about re-engaging these folks, or for new ones, think about retaining them, right? Knowing what we know about their mindsets, about the key barriers that they face. And so there's some common themes, regardless of their persona, that really bubble to the surface here. The first one we've already touched on briefly, but that's this idea of community. And there's really 2 elements to this. There's the true shared experiences, physical piece of it, like I just don't have anyone to go with. Help me find someone to go with, help me find a group, help me feel comfortable going and joining that group. But then there's also this element of identity, which Stephanie talked about, that we saw those really interesting results and sort of a dichotomy between those who were retained and said, yes, I am like sort of the typical angler or boater, and those who laughed and weren't seeing themselves in that community. So there's really this need to sort of expand how consumers perceive these communities and these activities as being relevant for me. The other strings that we can think about pulling here is the goal-oriented piece. And so making sure that we're aligning both of these activities to some of their other higher order goals. We talk a lot in behavioral science and that we cannot pay attention to everything in our environment, right? But what we're most likely to pay attention to are the things that align to our goals. So how can we make sure that we're speaking to some of their other goals to make sure that they pay attention to our messaging and see these activities as relevant for them? The next one is nostalgic appeals. There's really nice research, some really recent research actually, about how when consumers are faced with uncertainty in uncertain times, so pandemic, rise in inflation, the upcoming election, all things that are going to cue feelings of uncertainty, that we're more likely to seek nostalgia. And there's of course the backward looking piece of nostalgia. We saw a lot of really nice stories about, I used to go with my partner before they passed away, or my grandpa. But there's also a forward-looking element we can talk about, which is this idea of how do you create core memories for your kids today that one day they're going to look back on those moments on the boat or those moments at the local pond. Or how do you create moments with the people like your grandparents today while they're still here? So there's that forward-looking element as well. The next one is piggybacking, which we've already touched on. The research shows us that it's much harder to start a completely new habit than it is to piggyback on one that already exists. So whenever there is this opportunity to align angling and boating to activities that are already relevant to our audiences, it's going to be a much easier win or in for us, right? So let's think about all the things they're already doing, like going to the beach and hiking and wanting to exercise more, and how can we talk about those pieces and those activities they're already doing. The last one is fresh starts, which we haven't touched on it all yet, but fresh starts is this idea that there are moments in life where we take a pause, we reevaluate what we're doing, and as a result, we are more open-minded. We're more willing to try something new or take a risk. So these are going to be opportunity moments for us. And on the next slide, we have some more tactical ideas for you to think about how you would build this into your touch points, your communications, and your strategies. The first one is that socialization bucket. So how can we leverage communities that already exist, make sure we're elevating them, and as we talked about, really reducing the perceived risk in joining these. So making it clear that a novice is welcome to join. When is there going to be an expert available, or is the boat all set up for you and someone's going to guide you on how to maintain it? Whatever the case is, I think there's really an opportunity here to create shared bonds and elevate the communities that already exist. Building on those piggybacking activities, we know from our research that many of those that we sampled are already partaking in outdoor activities like hiking and biking. They're visiting parks, they're going to the beach. We even got more creative in our brainstorming around dinner club or book club. I actually have a group of moms that I go out with on a semi-regular basis when we can get away from our children. And we recently got a boat. One of the moms drove the boat and we took our happy hour out to the boat. It was an awesome experience. We were all talking about how we need to go back and do it again, but I think a nice example of it was something we were already doing, but we added boating to the activity of like getting together and having like mom time. Speaking to those higher order goals is going to be important as well, right? So, people being very aware of, I need to spend quality time with my kids. How does it help me do that? I need to take care of my emotional well-being and my physical well-being, and how can these activities help? The identity expansion. What we saw is that a lot of consumers do currently see these, especially those who are lapsed, may be wary of joining these activities and seeing them as only for someone who is super outdoorsy or very adventurous. But how can we instead also showcase in our communications identities such as the casual outdoor hiker, the person who just walks in the park on a weekly basis, the successful, busy businesswoman, or the caring parent. So making sure that we're showcasing this variety of identities throughout our communications is going to be important to subconsciously deliver that message that this is an activity for someone like me. And then we talked a bit about fresh starts, but to give you some more concrete ideas around that, one of the things we saw in the data was that those who were lapsed were more likely to only partake in the summer or the warmer months, right? So making sure that we hit them at these transition points where we celebrate the coming of spring or the start of summer, or even back to school, or maybe more monumental moments in life, like their retirement or when they become an empty nester or when they move. These are all moments where people are more likely to take a pause and be more open to retaking up these types of activities. On the next slide, we will go through, so these are sort of overarching strategies or tactics we can think about across the group, but here are some more specific strategies we can think about as we target those 3 personas that we think we're most likely to be able to reel back in. So the first one is that need for adrenaline or excitement, right? So right now, this group is more likely to see these activities as maybe not delivering enough excitement to them. So what are the ways that we can piggyback on some other exciting activities? Like they may be the type of person who's going on really cool mountain biking, really long hikes. How can we encourage them to bring that collapsible pole with them, right? Maybe they have a friend who has a boat and we can encourage them to explore or discover new locations, right? So really building in this element of excitement into it will be key. More tactically, I saw that actually a few of the parks were already doing geocaching, for example. So any way that we can gamify to add excitement to the activities, I think will be valuable. So do you get points for visiting new locations, or is there an opportunity to discover a hidden treasure along the trail? The next persona is really about accessibility. And one additional important note here is that what we found in terms of the mindset for this persona is that they also have a less of a need for control and a bit more risk-seeking. They don't need to control all the details, which really nicely then builds into this idea of shared boating opportunities. You can think of, you know, the Airbnb idea of boating, in that they're okay not controlling every element of the boat, given that it's less responsibility, you know, financially and physically for them, but they get all the joy and excitement of owning a boat. The other key call out here is this idea of reference points. Reference points is, in behavioral science, the fact that we never make decisions in a vacuum. We're always comparing it to something else, right? And so how can we make that comparison point appealing for the shared boating idea? So how can we show that by doing shared boating that you save X amount compared to owning your own boat? Or how can we show that it's actually comparable to taking your family out to the movie theater, or it's only as much as your current AT&T bill for your family, for example? So picking reference points that help optimize the appeal and value of it will be key here. The last bucket here are those who we heard a lot of, I've moved and I just don't really know where to go. Importantly here, it's not just that they moved, but it's that they also have this high degree of need for control and reduced uncertainty. They really want a stress-free option. They're not willing to go out and venture out without knowing exactly what they're getting themselves into. And so what are the ways that we can highlight spots that they already probably are familiar with or have heard of? And what are the ways that we can give them all the details around those spots? So even down to, where do I need to park? How long is the trail? What type of trail is it? Is it paved? What's the incline? Is there an opportunity for me to meet up with someone else? Is there an opportunity for me to have a mentor? What are the safety ratings? So reducing all the uncertainty about getting back out there in their new location will really be key to drawing these people back in. And now I'll turn it back over to JD to cover our 5 key takeaways.
Thank you, Sarah. So that is a lot to digest, right? And I will point out again that there's so much more to this research that this was only a pretty high level summary of it, believe it or not. So I would encourage you again to go dive into the rest of it on our Churn page. But thinking about what's important to take away from this today, there are a lot of takeaways. Hopefully you took some notes. Hopefully you'll have some questions, because we are going to allow some time for questions and have time for questions. But 5 key takeaways from my perspective. There are 3 R's in the R3 world, right? Again, we've been doing great work on recruitment, but developing loyal, long-term customers at the end of the day makes a lot of business sense. And everything you do to develop loyal long-term customers results in loyal long-term anglers and boaters at the end of the day. And that's what it takes to really knock this churn problem in the head. It's not enough just to get them in the door. We got to keep them coming back. So in order to do that, you've got to adopt these newcomers into the boating and fishing family, hold their hand through the process of truly getting hooked. And you've already heard a number of tactics to be able to do that. And I'll add another key takeaway: try something new. Traditional marketing and outreach efforts alone are not working. You saw that graph at the beginning. It's a downward spiral when it comes to the growth in the number of people that are falling out of these sports. And a moment to pause and put on the old hat, as I've got a great example of it at the when I was running the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation back in the day. We were doing the traditional model on our social media channels, sending out information that we felt like people needed to know from us as the learned scientists when it comes to fish and wildlife, ecology, biology, and that sort of thing. And then the communications team came to me and said, you know what, we think we could have a lot broader reach if we just broke the mold on that old model and try something new and fun and exciting and show our personalities. And the results were, even though I was a little trepidatious about the whole idea and didn't get comfortable with it right away, the results were phenomenal. I mean, just the growth in the number of people that come and consume information from the agency was vastly expanded as a result of that. So I can't stress it enough. Try something new. A couple of other key takeaways for us: break that mold, build a community around boating and fishing. You heard that several times throughout this presentation. People want to be a part of something, want to be a part of a community, build a community around boating and fishing, and it's going to help not just bring them in, but keep them in. And if I could leave you with only one thing, one take home from the day, it's own the churn problem and do your part to plug at least one hole in this leaky bucket. Dave Chanda mentioned at the very beginning that we've oftentimes focused on recruitment and leaned on our industry and government stakeholders to really address this retention and reactivation issue. And the fact of the matter is, we've got to continue to lean on our industry and government stakeholders to address it, because that's where the rubber meets the road, or I guess in this case, where the prop meets the water. You are our most invaluable allies when it comes to addressing this problem. We need everybody to play their part in addressing it. And we do have a few examples on the next slide from our own Take Me Fishing team here at RBFF. Some great examples that they have done in recent months and years when it comes to activating on some of these tactics that you've heard about on addressing churn, whether it's fresh starts, tie it to fall, tie it to a season, piggybacking, let's call it boat camping. People like to camp. Let's get them into boat camping and show them how piggybacking on something that's familiar to them actually works. Goal orientation, tie boating and fishing to higher order goals, 10 benefits of being in nature you might not know about. And nostalgic appeals. There are plenty of examples of on Take Me Fishing channels that show how if we tie it to great memories that people had on the water, it helps bring them back, and encouraging them to create their own memories is significant. So you see there the various social media channels that we have. There are multiple examples to see. And at the end of the day, we hope to, on our Churn page, provide additional examples across state, federal government, industry partners, to be able to display some of these great messaging tactics that have worked at great events that people have held. And to that end, next slide, we would ask you all, before you leave or as you leave, to think about these things. Have you implemented a successful strategy that was focused on retention and reactivation? If you have, can you share that with us? Because we would love to be able to spread that success with others. Sometimes we exist in a competitive space, and especially on the industry side, people don't like to share the secret sauce. But the fact of the matter is, if we are going to beat this challenge of people leaving boating and fishing, we're going to have to work together. We're going to have to do it together, and we're going to have to learn through the process of what works, what doesn't work, to really attack it head on a national scale. Pilots, we've got resources available to work with you to do some pilot work on some of these strategies and develop some great case studies out of that. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to us. We've already heard from a few folks already, but now that the research is being unveiled and released to everyone, hopefully there'll be more interest in it, and we're here to help, and we would love to work with you to do some of these pilots. And then training and certification programs. I know some of the national associations in particular have education, training, certification programs, and have interest in partnering with us to develop modules on effective ways to address churn, or hopefully you will. And I'll just point out the example there on the slide from the oldest freshwater fishing rodeo in the country in New Orleans, which is a great example of community building around fishing. It's a free fishable where they're going to have DJs and entertainment and food and crafts and all kinds of things, bringing that New Orleans community together around fishing and activating actually on what the churn research says is important. So with that, again, you've got the tip of the iceberg on this research, and it really is the front end of the process for what we can do to really address this critical issue when it comes to churn. And so we have got 15 minutes left here where we hope we'll have some good dialogue, questions and answers time. And for that, I'm going to turn it back to Rachel.
Thanks so much, JD. We're going to read out some of the questions out loud here, and then have Sarah, Stephanie, or you jump in and answer them. So, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Yeah, the first question came in when we were talking about the personas and some people wanting more productivity. So the question is, given the high productivity orientation, was there any correlation with high household incomes or their employment status type? Were these people more likely to be part of the C-suite and available time is far more limited or valued?
I can jump in and answer that. So I don't know that we looked specifically at men and women or at the high versus low productivity gender skews, but that obviously I think applied to all of the personas, so it didn't necessarily skew to just one of the personas. The other thing I think is important is all the personas tended to be similar age and similar gender. There are some skews for those with households with kids, which I was just looking up on my side, which there was a slightly higher influence of households with kids for the groups that are more likely to have lapsed due to interest or due to the adrenaline piece. But in terms of the high productivity, we didn't really look into the type of employment they have. But Sarah, I don't know if you know anything about generally the high productivity. I know in research we've done, regardless, your time is your time, however you're gonna use it, and it tends to be pretty valuable across the board to the individual person.
Yeah, one thing I was going to point out is a hypothesis we had going in, which I think maybe something you're getting at, is are lapsed boaters, anglers, do they actually have less disposable time, like free time, right? And what we found was that was not the case, maybe surprisingly. I do know that we explicitly looked at that because we were unsure going in with the hypothesis of how the data would shake out. And what we found was that when we asked people, like on average across a week, how much free time do you have, that they were about even for the retained and lapsed. And so I think then what you're seeing is this difference in how they frame their free time and want to use it. Not that they literally have less or more free time.
Great, thank you. The next question, you may have answered it already, but if you could just clarify, was there a difference between what caused a female angler to leave the sport rather than a male angler?
No, not overall. Some of the personas do tend to skew slightly more male or more female. So the affordable access persona does tend to skew more male. That was the one really around voter access. And then the desire for having an enthusiastic buddy was more likely to skew to be more females. But otherwise, they are both pretty equally split among men and women. And we had about equal representation of men and women in the study.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder to everybody, we will be sending out a copy of the slides and the recording when they are available. I'll be sending out an email with all that early next week. So next question is, how many people were surveyed in the study? And was there an average or mean age of the participant?
Yes, so we interviewed 300 lapsed anglers and 150 lapsed boaters. And there was some slight overlap to that because some people were both an angler and a boater. The average age is about 50 years old. It does range though from like, late 30s to a little bit older than 50.
Great, thank you. You didn't mention time on smartphones as one of the competitors for our time. Do you think people don't see that as an expenditure of time?
I suspect that's the case, that it's just so embedded in our lives these days that it would also be really hard. If I asked you, how much time do you spend on your phone a day, that you probably couldn't easily answer that because it is just like such a constant in our lives, for many of us at least. And so I suspect that we, A, wouldn't get like great survey data on that, and B, I also don't know that people compartmentalize it as much as it is just part of our everyday living, if that makes sense. It's not a separate way that we spend our time.
The next question is, if you had to lean into one persona to go after, which of them would you choose and why?
I think that depends on who's asking the question. JD, I don't know if you have a particular
Yeah, well, so
perspective.
yeah, and then you guys can fill it in. But I think the big difference is, are you really in fishing industry or a government agency that's really about the fishing piece of it versus the boating piece of it? Because while we did have personas that address both the angler and boater, there were particular ones that were really skewed towards anglers, and the other, affordable access, for example, is a great example that it skewed more towards boating. And it makes sense, right? There's a higher cost threshold to get into boating. And so if I'm in the boat business, I would go after that one, as opposed to anglers who probably more than boaters, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong, skewed towards needing the enthusiastic buddy. They need somebody to go with, somebody to take them out, somebody to make that experience a more social experience for them and help them feel more comfortable out on the water. So I think, that's the key question you got to ask first. What are you really into, fishing part or the boating part? And then there are personas to pick from there. And one of Sarah's last slides really focused on just 3 of the 5 personas, because we felt like those were the 3 lowest hanging fruit. And so of those 3, pick, from if you're more engaged in fishing, more engaged in boating, and go for it.
Yeah, I would just build to that because I did see Bobby put a little more detail into the questions. I would say the reason we didn't focus on the enthusiastic buddy piece is because there's a component of community in all of them, right? That's something that really is prevailing across all of these, is that people don't want to figure something out on their own, or they don't feel safe to do it on their own, or they don't feel like, they're going to enjoy it on their own, right? But there is this component of needing to do it with somebody. For all of them, the motivation might be a little bit different. So I would say from a fishing perspective, I think enhancing and emphasizing community is critical for all of the fishing personas. And then I think, you know, the adrenaline is an interesting angle. I think that one is one of the ones that had tended to be, I think, a little bit younger than the rest. So how can you introduce different types of fishing, or how can you sort of maybe like gamify the experience, make it a little bit more challenging, piggyback it with other more, I don't know, exerting activities? I think that could result in longer term enjoyment of the activity.
The questions are rolling in, so I'm going to just jump into the next one. Did you see a rate of people leaving boating for a period of time and then re-entering?
We did not collect that in this study.
Okay. Where did you draw your sample from?
Sample came from our proprietary community panel. So Ipsos manages various sample sources, but we have a pop-up community syndicated panel that we are able to kind of screen and see who would qualify, and then we invite people to participate in the community.
The people with lower interest that you saw, lower interest in the outdoors, were they mainly more urban?
No, I just looked into that as well, and we have about 30% representation of people in urban areas, and it pretty much is across the board between 25 and 30% of all personas, so no significant skew.
Did the cost of the sport seem to be much of a barrier if they had someone to go with?
So I think for boating, if you were going on somebody else's boat, then I don't believe it would have played a role as a barrier. I don't know that we have enough to really dig into that specific combination, but I do know that majority of those who are boaters who have lapsed were going on somebody else's boat. So I don't think so, but I think that accessibility is really tied to the ownership of a boat or a vessel.
Gotcha, thank you. Do you happen to know what might have motivated lapsed anglers to purchase a license initially?
I don't think we have that. We may have that in previous research. I don't think we have that in this research though.
I'm trying to think, like, maybe we asked them when they started and like what they liked about it and not, but I don't know that we asked them down to like, when did you first apply for a license and why?
Yeah, some of the first reasons they participated in boating were things like good way to spend time outside, outlet to relax and disconnect, a way to bond. So people do acknowledge a lot of those as being drivers, and I think maybe though they're finding that they can do those things, other things with people and still kind of gain those benefits.
Also, this is Rachel. I just wanted to let everyone know we do have some research on our research section of our corporate website, which does have some information on first-time license buyers. The most recent would be the December 2020 report that we did following the pandemic.
Great, thanks. That is all the questions we have right now. We can give it another minute for any more questions to come in. I do want to remind everybody, I just put a link in the chat box to our Churn research page. Once we have the webinar recording, we'll post that there, and we have lots of other resources to help you digest this information. We have one-pagers and some different information that can help you utilize this.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions, if you think of something later, please feel free to email us. We are available. You can also visit the takemefishing.org/churn website right there with the QR code on your phone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And please remember to take a few seconds to fill out the survey. Your feedback is really important to us. We'll send you, as Joanne mentioned, an email to notify you when the presentation and recording become available online. Thank you again and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.